It's week 6 of the NFL, and today we have a special Monday edition of the Fantasy Football Consultants. We'll talk a little bit about week 6 rankings, but the focus of this show is all about the rest of the season rankings, and we'll cover that coming up next. Hello everyone, I'm Eric Lee.
And I'm Gary Kurtzman, and we are the Fantasy Football Consultants. And Eric, this is exciting because 5 weeks are in the books, and finally, from a purely statistical standpoint, we have enough data now to start deviating meaningfully from our preseason draft rankings and talk about what those rest of the season rankings are going to look like. And Eric, there's some pretty exciting changes.
Yeah, we've learned a lot of information, and that's why on this show, if you're interested in the week 6 rankings, please go into fantasyfootballconsultants.net. Take a look at the weekly rankings, and you'll see that will be up midweek, and it'll be updated up to the games that occur on Sunday. But we really want to focus, Gary, on the rest of the season rankings. Now, they can. This only available to our newsletter subscribers, but it's completely free to subscribe, and we'll put the website link on screen now. It's basically fantasyfootballconsultants.net/rest of the season rankings. Fill out a little bit of information, and then you'll get an automatic email with the link to our information. So you spend a lot of time on these rest of the season rankings. Tell me a little bit about the process, and tell me a little bit of how people should use those rankings.
Sure, absolutely. So the way to go about any sort of statistical modeling, because that's what you're doing when you're doing rest of season rankings, is to try and figure out what the appropriate biases are between the information that we know after 5 games of football, or even 4 games for a few teams, relative to all of the body of work that happened in the preseasons, which of course went into the preseason rankings. And so, Eric, without being boring or going into too much detail, the reality is we've hit that magic mark. The magic mark is 5 games statistically where you have enough data that you can start meaningfully biasing your rest of season rankings towards what we have seen this year, while still making sure that you've captured the right variables, such as looking at targets and air yards, which turned out to be more statistically significant than, say, total yards or carries, for instance, because those kind of things can vary depending on what personnel people have going in and out. There were suspensions, there were injuries, people coming back, but average targets per minute of play, average air yards, things like that don't change based on personnel. So if you have the right data that you're correlating with, you can get some pretty powerful and pretty accurate projections, which, Eric, I'm telling you, this is deviating meaningfully from the regular season rankings, and it's just some fantastic nuggets to mine here.
Sounds a little geeky, but hey, it can help them win their fantasy league, so I'm sure we've got their attention. So let's start talking about quarterback. It was interesting in all our preseason shows, the emphasis that we said was wait on quarterbacks.
Yep.
Because we saw it as pretty deep. And your rest of the season rankings have proven that out, because a lot of the guys that weren't at the top of everybody's draft boards, guys like Pat Mahomes, guys like Ben Roethlisberger, guys like Jared Goff, have risen.
Yeah, tremendously. That strategy that fantasyfootballconsultants.net put out based on our modeling of wait on quarterbacks, because the quarterbacks in the second half of your draft are going to be pretty meaningfully close in the quarterbacks to draft in the first half. You're right, that definitely came to fruition. But Eric, I think based on the rest of season rankings, there's one quarterback in particular which, merits a pretty meaningful and interesting look.
Yeah, because most people, you already have the quarterback on your roster, and you're stuck with whoever you have unless you try to go out and do a trade. But one guy who's actually available in 82% of leagues is actually
Unbelievable.
our QB 13 for the rest of this season, and that is Jameis Winston. He takes on, before his bye in week 5, the number 1 passing offense. And let's be honest, folks. I believe it. Gary believes it. More importantly, the Buccaneers believe it. Jameis Winston is a better quarterback than Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's certainly a better fantasy quarterback because he can do so much with his legs. And I don't know, Gary, my opinion is if you don't have a top-notch quarterback, or if you have even somebody who is very good, like a Drew Brees or a Ben Roethlisberger, who really relies on home games, and maybe when they go on the road, you can slide in Winston. What do you think?
I think Winston can, for the rest of the season, be as valuable as those quarterbacks you just mentioned. He's number 13 in rest of the season rankings because rest of the season rankings are based on averages. But if you want to talk about a guy's ceiling versus floor, Jameis Winston has a top 5 ceiling for quarterback because he inherits Mike Evans, he inherits Chris Godwin, he inherits Deshaun Jackson, he inherits, after 2 more weeks for healing time, O.J. Howard. He literally has 3 wide receivers that are, fantasy-wise, in the top 20. That's unheard of. And a top 5 tight end. So he inherits all that. Basically, bottom line is, whoever was going to be the quarterback in Tampa was going to be extremely valuable with a very high ceiling for the rest of the season.
Okay, so that's quarterbacks. What about running backs, Gary?
So running backs, actually, of all the positions, had the least change from preseason rankings to regular season rankings, basically for the most part because most of the guys that you would have expected to do really well, turns out they did really well. Le'Veon Bell owners, I pity you. I understand your pain.
David Johnson owners.
Yeah, he's come around the past couple weeks, but yeah, I understand your pain.
Well, they're still disappointed.
Absolutely. But here's one guy that I want to target. Okay, the one guy that I want to target is James White. Because James White of New England, it's almost like a war of attrition, folks. James White is no more talented than he has been for the New England Patriots for the last couple years, but he has a heck of a lot more opportunity now because they literally are only carrying 2 running backs on their roster solely through attrition. And Sony Michel is not nearly the pass catcher James White is. So, bottom line, how are the New England Patriots using James White? They're obviously using James White on 3rd down as a pass catcher, but more than that, they do not want to be predictable, and that's why they are rushing him 7 to 8 times a game, as well as giving him 7 to 8 catches on 9 or 10 targets. Bottom line is this guy is touching the ball almost as much as your absolute tier 1 top flight running backs, and he's doing basically as much with the touches as they are. So the model predicts that his usage will go down a little bit solely because New England is getting ahead of in games and they're having a more favorable schedule, which should mean more Sony Michel, less James White. But folks, he touches the ball nearly 15 times a game and gets basically 6 yards per touch. He averages 90 yards per game, and he averages a touchdown because he has the 3rd most red zone targets of any running back in football. So that's opportunity.
And right now we have him ranked at number 33. And as you enter the bye weeks, this is a guy that is going to likely be starting for a lot of fantasy teams.
Yeah, and especially, just to make the point, I'm trying to highlight high ceiling guys. Because just like we talked about with Jameis Winston, this guy has the ceiling to be a top 10 running back going forward.
Let me ask you this. Are you concerned at all, and maybe this is maybe why you've lowered him down to 33, but are you concerned at all about that Patriot passing game, which has gotten a lot more crowded as the season has gone along? Not only Gronkowski, but Chris Hogan, and now Julian Edelman's coming back, and Josh Gordon is going to get more into the offense. Or do you think because he's the running back, that dump-off is always going to be in the game plan?
You know what? They had Gordon, they had Edelman last game, and James White paced the team with 14 targets. I'm less worried about that. I'm just more worried about New England continuing to be ahead. They had a pretty slow start to the season, 2-2, right? They're now 3-2, which meant that they had to pass a lot more. The reason why he's 33 and not much higher is only because of the difference in the distribution between run and passes projected going forward. Absent that, this guy's got one hell of a ceiling.
Let's move on to wide receivers, Gary.
Absolutely. So wide receivers had one of the biggest amount of change between what the preseason rankings and what the rest of the season rankings were. Just to focus on one guy with an incredibly high ceiling, Cooper Kupp. My little Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. You could argue, Eric, he's not even the best receiver on the team. right? Because the big spicy name is Brandon Cooks. And, quite frankly, he actually is second in targets to Robert Woods. So you could plausibly argue, what the heck are you highlighting a third best wide receiver on a team, for God's sakes? And the reason why is this guy has been astonishing for all of the very predictable reason. Look, last year what happened to Cooper Kupp? Cooper Kupp had the third most red zone targets of anybody in football. What's happened this year to Cooper Kupp? He improved it. He has the most red zone targets of any wide receiver in football. He is on pace for over 30 red zone targets for the season. That would even beat what he had last year, for crying out loud. Even the elite receivers typically get a couple per game, and that puts you right about at that 30 or low 30s mark. This guy has the red zone targets to match or surpass even the most elite receivers, and he is the Rams' most reliable, most consistent possession receiver. Works out of the slot. Jared Goff loves to throw to slot receivers. He's a little weaker on the deep pass. He's a little better on the short and intermediate pass. And that's Cooper Kupp's strength. What does all that amount to? All that amounts to this guy gets 90 yards a game, which is not terribly different from what he got last year. But with all those red zone targets, he also averages a touchdown a game. If you extrapolate that over the course of the season, this guy is another guy with a top 10 ceiling. So why did we rank him at 31 and not higher? Eric, you totally hit on it. It's that the Rams have a very crowded receiving corps. And it's difficult from week to week to tell what the distribution is going to be. Don't forget Todd Gurley also casts his passes too. So it's basically 4 mouths to feed. But boy, he's not only reliable, but as far as the ceiling is concerned, with all the targets he gets per game and with the number one in the NFL red zone targets, this guy's got a top 10 ceiling.
Yeah, as Jared Goff has developed and gotten better, all boats have risen, and Cooper Kupp has been a beneficiary of it. One slight concern that you want us to pay attention to the news: Cooper Kupp did suffer a concussion in Week 5, so we're hoping, for many reasons, that is not a serious condition. At tight end, Gary, this is another opportunity for a potential waiver wire pick, because I was very surprised to see that that Evan Engram was only owned in 71% of the leagues. Obviously, he suffered an injury and he's been out. But let's not forget about how important Evan Engram is to that New York Giants offense. I mean, we've talked about it before. He's really a tight end in wide receivers' clothing. He often spreads out wide. He's very involved in the passing game. On our list, we have him as a tight end 8. So this is a guy that should be starting in all leagues. So if he is available in your league, snap him up.
Yeah, I think what happened is 29% of the people, he used to be near 100% owned. And I think 29% of the people probably dropped him because he got injured. And if you could hop on that and beat him to the waiver wire, do it. That guy's a difference maker.
He's expected to be back in Week 6, or if not, definitely Week 7. So we like his ability. Now, in our rest of the season rankings, we do cover defenses. We're not going to talk about it in this video, but we wanted to just whet your appetite for the rest of the season rankings. It's so critical to help you decide trade proposals as you reach the stretch run of your fantasy season, or making those good pickups or drops when you realize it's time to move on.
You have failed me for the last time.
So Gary, the thing that I would like to make sure that everybody knows is, in addition to doing the rest of the season rankings this week, we're actually going to do waiver wire pickups. So you want to click on the video with where we talk about the waiver wire video. That's right underneath the screen as I'm talking about right now. And until our next video, please remember to click the red button to subscribe if you haven't yet, and hit the bell icon so you're notified of all our videos. And until then, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.